Hello everyone. Today I'm just going to do a quick video about what's in my opinion the top 5 mid laners to play if you want to win your rank games and climb the ranks in the current meta, and also how I would build them personally. To start, we're just going to go to the chernobog. The way that I would build him personally, I would start Leather Cowl, Morningstar, and then go 2 health, 2 multi. The reason you don't need mana is because you have MP5 for Morningstar and Cowl, as well as the fact that you're a hunter, so you'd clear the wave with your auto attacks a lot more than your abilities. As long as you're not spamming them, you should be fine. If you're getting totem, you should be full mana at almost all times. You're really just farming until you get Transcendence anyways. You shouldn't be fighting before that. Once you get Transcendence is when you can start fighting. You do have a very big spike when you have Transcendence. You're going to be stronger than any other mage at that point in the game. So as long as you're not against a 100 mid or something like that, you should win any 2v2 for the most part, unless you have a really low pressure jungler and they have something that's very high pressure, such as like an Erlang Shen or something. And then after that, you go Atlanta's Bow. Once you kind of get Atlanta's is when you can kind of start rotating with your ultimate and start ulting the fights consistently, because you'll actually be able to start killing people. Before that, you really just want to outfarm the other mid laner via the fact that you're a hunter. You can solo a lot of stuff that they can't, like red buff and things like that, oracles, things that other mages might not be able to do by themselves, so they have to wait for their jungler to really come to the farm, which not only splits the farm, delays the amount of time that it's up until, whereas you could do it immediately off respawn due to the fact that you have a little bit of sustain with Cowl, you have multi potions as opposed to mana potions, and things like that. After you get Atlanta's, you're just farming, you're rotating. You want to farm and rotate, try to get a lead if you can, try to impact, specifically in the duo lane. A lot of ADCs like to play up in duo lane, so you can get a lot of free rotations on them, especially if you can catch them dashing or something like that. It's just free kills for you. And then you go Failnaught into Deathbringer. The reason you go Deathbringer before Silver Branch is because you really need the Deathbringer spike in order to be able to start carrying the game. It really increases your burn on objectives dramatically and increases your crit chance. Um, the two items prior to it is crit. You just want to be able to crit people in just one shot, which is why you do that. You shouldn't really be hitting tanks for the majority of the early game. You generally want to just ult past the tanks and into the back line after a fight starts. That's pretty much why you go Silver Branch last. You generally finish your starter item before you finish Silver Branch. If you're behind, you might want to go Silver Branch before Deathbringer, and then like game you'll upgrade the Deathbringer to Envenomed. Envenomed is better than Malice. It's a lot harder for somebody to box you like a jungler or something like that. If you crit them, you're just taking less damage. It's just a very good item. On top of the fact that it slows, so if you ult into the back line and you get a crit, you're going to be faster because you're in your ultimate, and they're going to be moving slower because of Deathbringer. So it's just pretty simple. Just be careful in the early game. Wait till you get Transcendence before you start doing anything really in fighting. Once you get Atlantis, try to ult to fights and rotate a lot more, as opposed to just fighting in the mid lane. And that's pretty much it for chernobog. The next best god, in my opinion, carry rank games from, would be Soul. The reason you play Soul is because she has a lot of pressure. You can go Gilded Arrow, so you're going to outfarm a lot of people. You can solo things, pretty much very similar to chernobog. You're going to go Gilded into Emerald Ring, which is tier 1 Ring of Hecate. And then you're going to go 2 health, 2 multi. You get a lot of mana sustain from Gilded Arrow as long as you're getting your last hits. You should be fine. You should outbox pretty much anybody if you have your passive in the mid lane. The other reason you go Gilded as opposed to something like Conduit is because Gilded gives you 20 auto attack damage. Basic attack damage on mages is basically equivalent to 5 times the amount, because mages only get 20% scaling on their abilities. So 20 basic attack damage is almost equivalent to 100 power if you're auto attacking somebody, which is why you would go Gilded. And then late game, you upgrade it into Diamond Arrow. Pretty self-explanatory. You can't crit with Ornate, so you just get the extra basic attack damage from Diamond Arrow. The attack speed is nice if you get it. It's not the main priority. You're going to finish Hecate when you can. As soon as you get Hecate, you can start fighting anybody. You should win almost any trade at this point in the game. You're going to be around like level 6, level 7. You can solo things. You can solo red buffs, things like that. You can do whatever you want, really. And then you go into Polynomicon. The reason you go Poly and not something like Magus is because it's, for one, cheaper. Two, the spike that you get from the Polynomicon is very high. If you manage to get somebody with a 2 and a Poly proc, you can really one-shot somebody in the early game. And then you go Typhon's Fang. It just stacks with your 2 previous items, which are Lifesteal. It's about 150 power spike at around level like 12, 13, 14, depending on how good you're farming. It's just a very strong item, as well as the fact that it gives penetration, which means you can kind of get away with going Rata Tahuti in the 4th slot. It's very expensive. That's the only problem with it. If you don't think you can get away with going Rata Tahuti, you can go something like Demonic Grip or Obshard in that slot, and then finish it with whatever you want. Um, sometimes I like to finish with a Reaver. Sometimes I go Telkines if I don't have Demonic. Sometimes I go Demonic after Rod. Sometimes I go Divine if they have a lot of Boomba's Hammer Gods, or somebody that's building like Death's Embrace or something, like an Osiris or something like that. That's being kind of a problem for me. Um, Other than that, for the most part, you can kind of go whatever. If you need Divine Ruin because you're against something that's very heavy healing, such as like a Hell or a Sylvanas or something like that, you can just skip the Polynomicon and just go Divine in that slot, and then go Ray of Hecate Divine Typhons, and then go Obshard into Polynomicon, in my opinion. So it would look something like this. In the finished build, it'd be something like this. If you were against a heavy healing comp, it would look something like that. If you're not against a heavy healing comp, you just build them in the order. It'd be Diamond, Hecate, and then Polynomicon Typhons Rod, and then after that you have a free 6 slot for whatever you feel is necessary for that game. These are just some of the options that I would go depending on the game. And then moving on to the 3rd best god in my opinion is Thoth. Just a bully. He just bullies every other mid laner. You just kind of do whatever you want in the mid lane. You do have to be careful with Thoth because you can't first pick him. If you're picking first top pick, you might not want to pick this character. However, if you're picking like 2nd, 3rd, or anything lower than that, he's a great pick, and he will bully any other mid laner. He's very good also into people that are playing non-traditional solo laners or non-traditional junglers, such as like Poseidon jungle or playing an ADC in solo lane, because that means they're losing a dive, and you're already a god that's very hard to dive because you have so much range. To start, I would normally go Sands into tier 1 Warlocks, and then I go 2 health, 1 mana, and you're just farming for Warlocks. If your jungler is not going to help you on the 2nd red spawn, you should just back for tier 2 Warlocks, and then do green to your wave, and then come back for the red buff. A lot of people will try to like solo the red buff or something like that. I would advise against doing so, unless your support or your jungler is going to come help you. It's pretty bad to try to do that on Thoth just because your clear is so weak in the early game. And then after you go Warlocks, you go Divine into Obshard Reaver. Pretty standard, just anti-heal, percent pen. Reaver is one of the best items in the game. Then you can finish with either Pendulum or Timeline. 90% of the time, I would say go Pendulum, but if you are getting really hard dove, or they have like a warrior support, and then they have 2 people that are diving you from solo and jungle, you might want to go Timeline to give you a little bit more time to live, because you get the protections, and then you get the passive, potentially. If not, I would just go Pendulum in most situations. And then last item, you can kind of finish it off with a Soul Gem, a Rata Hoodie, or an E-Staff. All 3 are pretty good. It's very situational. I think Soul Gem is probably my favorite, but you can definitely mess around with Rata Hoodie or Ethereal Staff and figure out what works best for you. In my opinion, I would go Soul Gem probably 85% of games, unless I'm against like a triple tank comp, in which case I would go E-Staff. Rata Hoodie is very good, but it is really expensive, and it just delays your 500 pot. And I think getting a Soul Gem 500 pot is probably more valuable than getting a Rata Hoodie. However, if you have the money for it, or you're just completely fragging out and you're like 12-0 or something, you can definitely get a Rata Hoodie last item and put in some work with that. The next best god, in my opinion, is ullr. ullr is just an insane character. He plays 4 roles very well. You put him solo, jungle, mid, ADC, you can put him anywhere, and he just does the same thing no matter what. He's just gonna get insane amounts of pressure and just be a menace in the late game. If you hit an axe, they will die. Pretty simple. You go Bluestone, Morningstar, 2 mana and 2 healing. The reason you don't go multi-pots is because you're more of an ability-based god as opposed to somebody like chernobog, so you kind of need the extra mana sustain. Then you go Transcendence, Yoins. Once you get Transcendence, you really start one-shotting the other mid laner. You should have a lot of pressure. You should be securing mid camps over them and trying to fight as early as possible. Especially in the 2v2 situation, if you hit an axe stun and your jungler is there, you should be killing whoever you are stunning if they don't beads. Just a very strong character. After that, you go Hydra, so you can one-shot with your auto attack cancels, and then Titan's Bane. If you need brawlers, you can go at last item if you're against like Boomba's Hammer Gods or something like that. If you need it early game, just slot it in for Jotuns, and then go Jotuns after the Hydras. So you'd go something like Bluestone, Trans, beatstick, hydras, and then you would go Jotuns into Titan's Bane. If you want to, you can also just skip the Jotuns altogether and get a Heartseeker last. It's very situational, but generally I would just say go Brawlers like, you know, 4th or 5th, not including your starter item, so I guess that would be 5th or 6th, and then, you know, just see if you even need it. If you don't need Brawlers, like they have no healing or something, you can just get a Heartseeker last item, and it'll do a lot of work for you. Bluestone Brooch is the better upgrade. Don't get the Redstone. The Redstone is not good. Bluestone is just the way to go. It's a lot of poke. If you get a 3 on somebody late game, you can really take like 400 or 500 damage off somebody very easily with the Bluestone and the Heartseeker, and you're not even hitting them with auto attacks or anything. It's just before the fight, you get a free 500 poke on the back line. Very good. And the best god, in my opinion, right now is Huang. Very, very strong character. Incredibly strong, in my opinion. The reason he's above ullr is because if you're playing ullr in the mid lane, you might have a 4 physical comp, which makes it easy to build around, whereas Huang doesn't have that issue because he's a mage. You don't require anybody else on your team to do anything or pick something that they might not be comfortable with, because you're able to do so much as a mage anyways. The way that I would build it is I'd start Sands into tier 1 Book of Thoth, and then I go 2 health, 1 mana. You're really just farming until you get Book of Thoth. You don't really want to fight in the 2v2. You do have an okay 2v2 because you have a CC. If you hit the root and you have a high pressure jungler, you can very easily kill people. However, just make sure that you have a high pressure jungler, because if you have something weak, you might not be able to fight in the 2v2 at all. And a lot of the time, it's worth just getting your 3 at level 2 just to make sure that you don't die by getting blinked on or something like that. And then after Book of Thoth, I like to go Divine Ruin. Just anti-heal, pretty straightforward. It's flat pen, lets you hit squishes very hard. And then I go Reaver into Obshard. Reaver's pretty self-explanatory, Obshard's self-explanatory. The reason I don't go Coin is because you spend an extra 50 gold to get an Obsidian Shard, which is just a lot more value. It's the same reason I don't go Coin on Thoth. You're just paying 50 gold to get the penetration later, but you get an extra 20 power on top of that, so it's just a good value in my opinion. Then you could finish with a Pendulum or a Timeline, kind of the same thing as Thoth. You can go either or. 90% of the time you would go Pendulum in my opinion, but if you are getting hard dove consistently, you might want to think about a Timeline perhaps. And in late game, I like to go Soul Gem or Polynomicon. Usually you can get a Rod into Hootie, especially Calamity Rod. If you hit the root on your 2, you can get a lot of poke with it. However, I think just being able to poly proc somebody or get a soul gem proc is just more value. I generally build Polynomicon, so my build would generally be like Pendulum, Book, Divine, Reaver, Obshard, and then Poly. If you hit it 2, you get a guaranteed poly proc. If you have your passive charge and you 3 in, you get a guaranteed poly proc off the knockup. You also get a guaranteed poly proc off the ultimate if they do not beads the push, because it's at the exact end of your auto attack range. So just a lot of poke. It starts hitting for about like 500-600 late game. You get a lot of damage. If you don't need Divine Ruin, you can actually, sometimes I'll go Polynomicon just second. I'll go Book into Polynomicon and then go Reaver Obshard or Obshard Reaver depending on the game, maybe something like this. And then I'll get a Soul Gem last. The reason I don't go Rod most of the time is just it's expensive, kind of the same thing I thought. It's very expensive. Sometimes it's better to just get an item like Soul Gem and get 500 pot. However, if you are just, you know, unbelievably ahead or you're just farming really well, you could definitely get a Rod into Hootie, and there's nothing wrong with that in the last slot, something like that perhaps. That's my top 5 gods. That's what I think you should be playing in ranked if you want to climb, if you want to win your games. That's pretty much it. Nothing else really to it. Very quick and simple.